I'm going to talk about the Djinn from a slightly different perspective. Pierre covered such wonderful ground this morning on some of the connections between Djinn and ancient beings, including the angels and the gods. These are things I have explored myself. But I'm going to be focusing especially on the ET abductions and what is the role of the Djinn, because there is a role for the Djinn in ET abductions. What is that role and what does it mean to us? Not just in terms of abductions, but to the whole of humanity. Just to give you an idea of the scope of my work, Ben mentioned that I have written 59 books. Yes, people ask me how I do it. I don't know. I don't want to know. I just do it. But I'm fascinated by all of these things and how they are interconnected. And so my work over the past 30 years, and actually it's a lifelong project for me, lifelong. My work is my life and my life is my work. I investigate the paranormal, which includes ghost hauntings, spirit attachments, and spirit communications, UFOs and ETs, encounters and sightings. I'm not so much interested in nuts and bolts aspects of it, but the human side of it. How do human beings experience sightings, craft, encounters with entities? What do they do with that information, with that experience? Cryptids, encounters with unknown beings. Some of these are mysterious creatures that seem to be combinations of things. And I'm also deeply involved in the metaphysical realm, spiritual development and expansion of consciousness. I'm a hypnotist, I do past life regression, I'm an energy healer, I'm a reader, I do psychic readings, and I have had many spiritual experiences with a variety of beings. Including some mystical experiences. But especially I look for the connections among all these areas because everything is interconnected. No matter how far you go on the dark side or how far you go on the light side, you will find connections linking everything together. And so I've often described my work as A to Z, literally angels to zombies and everything in between, and that's the truth of it. Well, I mentioned that I'm especially interested in context. So how do we find meaningful context in all of these experiences, regardless of whether or not we've had a scary experience in a haunted place, or whether we've had some mind-expanding, consciousness-uplifting experience with a being of unknown origins? What do we do with that, and how do we explain it within the context of history? And I have found through examining these anecdotal accounts and experiences that people have had the same core experiences throughout history. We have just put different labels on them. So what are we doing with these experiences, and how do we keep advancing our knowledge of ourselves, the world, our place in the cosmos? And where do we go from here? Because I do believe that we are at a major turning point in the evolution of humanity, in the development of our consciousness, and our sense of our place in the greater scheme of things. So let's focus in on Djinn and ETs. So what we're going to cover today is the road to the Djinn. How did I get to the Djinn and their role in this particular aspect of entity contact experience? Who are the Djinn, how the Djinn interact with humans, and what is the search for meaning and all of that. So we're going to cover a variety of viewpoints, and I certainly have my own opinions on this that I will share with you too. Well, my road to the Djinn began with the shadow people. Now, I had been heavily involved in paranormal investigation about 10 years ago, and what happens with me in my work is that I will often get a flood of inquiries about something. And I wind up looking at experiences that are very similar, but yet they come from widely different sources and places. People who've had no contact with each other, and yet they are incredibly similar or even the same. And what does it all mean? So 10 years ago, in 2004, I had what I describe as a mini tsunami of inquiries involving these beings called shadow people. Now, they've been known by many other names, and most of the time people don't even call them shadow people, but they were all the same, dark entities that were terrorizing people, and they were very often bedroom invaders. People would wake up in the middle of the night and see these dark entities in their bedroom who seemed to be very evil because they threw off an incredibly malevolent energy. People were terrified. What were they? Were they demons? Were they ghosts? What were they, and more important, why were they attacking people? So I thought, well, this is interesting. I think I'll look into this. I'll interview people, maybe do some magazine articles or a chapter or two in a book, and move on. I'll put it into context with something. Well, little did I know that this would turn out to be the beginning of a 10-year search that is still going on, because the tentacles from shadow people spread out in all directions. They hit every single area of work I have ever covered, and even opened up some new areas for me. Now, in my research, I discovered that shadow people have been dealt with in various forms, including the media. And I found a very interesting clip from the Twilight Zone that illustrates this kind of contact experience and the terror that goes with this. Now, this is from the 1980s Twilight Zone. And whoever wrote the script for this had probably been an experiencer himself. It concerns a young boy who's in his teens, and he's afraid to sleep in the dark because when the lights go off, a being comes out from under his bed and terrorizes him.
Danny? Danny, I thought we'd had this discussion innumerable times. Your father and I could understand this behavior when you were younger, but you are 13 years old now. You're a young man. And you should not have to sleep with all of these lights and the TV and the radio on.
But, Mom...
No buts. Now close your eyes and go to sleep. And I don't want to hear a peep out of you tonight. There. Now, good night.
Okay. Well, when it happens to kids, adults dismiss this thing as the bogeyman. But it's more than that, because adults have these experiences too. This is not imagination. This is something that happens to men and women, adults and children, all ages, and sometimes throughout life. So it is an experience that many people have. And what I discovered was that many people who were shadow people experiencers did not know that this is a very common phenomenon. They did not know they shared a similar, if not the same, experience with untold numbers of people. I began collecting stories, and I did do an article on shadow people for Taxpayer magazine. This is the magazine published by the Ghost Hunters team in America. And here again, I thought this would end it for me, but it did not, because once I started talking about shadow people, the accounts started pouring in. And I have over 1,000 of them today. I have them in a database, and they split out into core experiences and sub-satellites of experiences. They do not share all the same phenomena, but there are similar phenomena that repeat from experience to experience. So clearly something was afoot here with our interactions with beings in other dimensional realms, because it did not seem to me that these were ghosts. I've had quite a bit of experience ghost hunting. Most of them are residues. They do not interact with people. These were some sort of sentient being, very intelligent, very crafty, deliberately wanting to frighten people. Yet they didn't seem demonic because there was not the usual pattern of demonic deterioration in a person's life once they come under assault by a dark entity. So what were they? I could not put my thumb on what exactly they were, but I could identify their characteristics. The typical shadow person is a male-like humanoid figure, 6 to 8 feet tall. In fact, some of them are quite a bit taller. They almost always have on a coat or a cape, and sometimes with a hat. And it's always a strange hat, like a stovepipe hat, Victorian stovepipe hat, or a cowboy hat, or what we would call a detective fedora. It's always out of fashion, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But I do have some ideas about why they do wear a hat. And sometimes they have robes with hoods or cowls. They are solid. There's very little detail in them. People rarely see things like eyes or faces or appendages. They're solid black. And yet they seem to have mass because they will block out light behind them. If they engage with people physically, people feel that they are in a tussle with a physical being, and yet on a moment's notice, they can vanish into thin air. They can go through walls, slide back under the bed, you look, there's nothing there, go back into the closet, there's nothing there, go up through the ceiling, out through the window, down through the floor, evaporating into mist and smoke, and away they go. They are almost always bedroom invaders, and yet I did find shadow people in other kinds of experiences as well, including daytime experiences. So here are some drawings from shadow people experiencers, and you can see that some of them will share similar characteristics, and yet none of them really looks like a regular human being. They have a human-like shape, but it's often very ambiguous, and it seems to be disguised by this, what appears to be a garment they are wearing. Very rare to see things like hands or feet. That's quite common in entity contact experiences in general. Now, sometimes they don't have hats or capes. People will sometimes see eyes, or if they do not see eyes, they know they're being stared at very intently, and they will put eyes in their drawings because they want to illustrate this feeling of being stared at. There is almost always a hostile or malevolent intent behind these beings. Sometimes they are seen out in the woods. I've been to many areas in what I call portal zones where a lot of ongoing activity is occurring over the course of long periods of time, and these areas are often populated by robed beings. You never see their faces, who are gliding about in the woods, and they do move extremely quickly. As I mentioned, they usually have no eyes. They rarely communicate with people. I have cases where they have given messages to people, but usually they are silent, and that ratchets up the terror for people, because when they show up without warning, nobody knows what they are, what they want, and why they're there, and that makes the psychological factor all the more scary for people. They go through solid matter, and as I mentioned, they often vanish into thin air. Now, animals do not like them. Some of you who are familiar with the abduction phenomena are already seeing some patterns here. Beings that move through walls, beings that show up in the bedroom, create fear and terror. Animals do not like them, vanish at a moment's notice, and are hard to pin down, if not impossible to pin down, as to who exactly they are. What's more, people who are regular experiencers of shadow people feel they have no control over this visitation. They come, these entities come when they want. They seem to have complete volition as to what they do with human beings, and the victims often feel at their mercy. They are frequently paralyzed during this experience. They cannot move or cry out. One of the more dramatic experiences I got was from a 36-year-old man who lived with his son, his 8-year-old son, and he was what I would call a serial experiencer. And he said the pattern was always the same. He would wake up feeling paralyzed in bed, and he would know that it was going to get him. And the presence of it would always start outside in the woods and advance into the house as though it was a horror film, ratcheting up the terror. And then he could feel it in the house, and then he could feel it in the hallway, and then he could feel it outside his bedroom door. Well, one night he slept with the bedroom door closed, and it came. And he had this thought in his head as he laid there paralyzed in bed that somehow, even though it could go through solid matter, that it was not going to get him because the bedroom door was closed. And he said to himself, I can't get in because the door is closed. And immediately this being thought back to him, put words in his head telepathically that said, but your son's door is open. And immediately he knew this being was racing down the hallway to the bedroom where his son was sleeping. All he could do was pray that nothing was going to happen to his son. And what happened after that, unfortunately there's no good Hollywood ending to this, because a lot of these experiences end in no resolution. The experience suddenly stops. It gets to that moment of horrible terror where you think something very dreadful is going to happen, and then boom, it's gone. Which you might think would bring relief to people, but it does not. It brings more terror because it's like, when is it coming back? So this happened to him periodically throughout life, and I found these sorts of descriptions among many experiencers. Most shadow people come by themselves, but sometimes they come in pairs. Sometimes they will come in small groups. And there's a shorter version of them that's 3 to 5 feet tall, and the shorter ones seem to have the ability to terrorize people more than the larger ones. Here are some descriptions from experiencers. It was if you were to cut out a human shape from a black poster board. It reflected no light. It was a shadow moving along the wall with the shape of a human but featureless. Sometimes people will see these things on the walls of their bedrooms like they are shadows, and then the shadow literally materializes into 3D form in their bedroom and starts to engage with them. Now, I mentioned that men and women alike have these, and children as well. I did not find any distinction between gender or age group. Many experiences are one-off. They happen to a person once in their lifetime, and that's it. Some are serial, some are even multi-generational, and that really intrigued me, that it seemed to be that these shadow beings made it their business to follow certain bloodlines around. They plagued multi-generational members of the same family. I also found that when people were going through emotional difficulty in life, that seemed to attract these beings. Not everyone who goes through an emotional upheaval will have shadow people experiences, but that was a significant factor. It was as though the negative emotions were literally bringing these entities in, a vampiric element going on, because I became convinced that they were feeding off this fear. And in fact, fear, panic, and terror are the 3 words that appear in almost every written account, every interview I have ever done concerning shadow people. Fear, panic, and terror. So clearly these beings had the capability to instill a deep primeval fear in people. And what is the purpose of that? There are cases where people have engaged in physical encounters with these beings. And I'm going to call your attention to that glow around the shadow person, because that became a significant factor as my research unfolded, and also corresponded as well to glows around aliens. There seemed to be like an electrical energy about these beings, and electrical energies in environments affected them as well. People often found if they kept their TVs on, the lights on, it seemed to disperse or prevent these beings from showing up, but not always. There aren't any universal formulas. It was one of the few times I was sincerely afraid for my life. It had the shape of a man and stood over 6 feet tall. There were no details or features. It was blacker than black without really having a true color. It was more like void of all color, with maybe a hint of a bright blue around the outline, similar to the color of an electric arc. It started as a physical and, I believe, a spiritual attack. The presence was trying to suffocate me. Whatever it was well beyond my strength. The fight lasted probably only a few seconds, but seemed an eternity to me. I fought it off with every ounce of strength I could muster and prayer. It was one of the few times I was sincerely afraid for my life. Another case. Here, the experiencer has, we're going around these circles of what do you call these people? Victims, contactees, experiencers. There's no good terminology right now. I think all of the terms apply. This figure looked like something that was fluid. It didn't have very well-defined boundaries, and as you can see, kind of this misshapen head, which also shows up over and over again. This is one of the reasons why I think they put the hat on their form. These are shapeshifters, and there's something that they can't quite get right about the head, so they put a hat or a cowl on. But at any rate, another experience where a weight comes down and the person wakes up, and this entity is then at the foot of the bed snaking this long arm out toward the victim. Suddenly the weight lifted off me, and I was able to see my attacker, the shadow image. I couldn't move. The physical sense of weight on my chest, this was before he was able to sit up. My shoulders were pinned down. It felt as if it was holding a pillow over my face, preventing me from breathing. Getting it off and being able to take a breath was both physical and spiritual. Here again, we have another description of people feeling that there's something else going on here besides just a physical sort of encounter. I was pinned down like from a wrestling move with physical weight on top of me. I tried pushing, rolling, and thrashing about. I thought someone had gotten into the apartment and was attacking me. As well as trying to fight it off me, I was praying for my life. I didn't have the strength to get it off. Suddenly the weight lifted off me, and I was able to see my attacker, the shadow image. It was so real that I checked all doors and windows after the attack to see how anyone could have gotten into the apartment. Everything was locked from the inside. The author of that account was a 22-year-old man who was a wrestler and in top physical condition, and he was thrashing with some unknown being who was getting the best of him. This is from the abduction literature. This is a 9-foot-tall shadow being that appeared to a young boy, and it appeared to be holding a box. And the mother had the feeling that this being intended to harm the boy somehow by using this box. And she told her son that this being had no power to hurt him whatsoever. And with that, it vanished like smoke. Now, sometimes prayer seems to push these things off and sometimes not. There's no universal formula. Telling these things to go away works for some people, and for others it's like swatting at a wasp. It only makes it worse. Photographing these entities has been a goal of many paranormal researchers, and I have seen very few photographs. I'm going to show you one that I consider to be one of the best. And that was taken at the Lincoln Theater in Decatur, Illinois several years ago. I had just given a lecture on shadow people. This is a haunted theater where a paranormal conference takes place every year. And I have found that when I talk about shadow people, it seems to bring them in, like they want to know what I'm saying about them. And I think that is the case. But there was an investigation of the theater after the conference. One of the things that paranormal investigators do is they take photographs at random, just hundreds and hundreds of rapid-fire photographs, hoping that something anomalous is going to show up. And the gentleman who took this was one of my associates from Chicago, a group that I belong to and consult for. And he did not see this figure with his eyes when he took the photograph. It only showed up when he examined the photograph. And you can see it right there. Now, there's nobody in the theater. There are a couple people sitting down here. There's no light source that would account for casting any sort of weird shadow. Here you can see, this is the area we're talking about right here. This shadow figure manifests almost, I think these beings do it deliberately, manifested as sort of a signal like, yes, here I am. That's the best close-up that I could get of it. You can see how blurry it is. Now, so skeptics will often say, well, you know, if you've really got a photograph of an entity, how come it's so blurry? And then if it's not blurry, the argument is, well, it's so clear it couldn't possibly be anonymous. You must have faked this. So it's a no-win situation. But how do we know what entities should look like on our photographic evidence anyway? We're dealing with interdimensional beings who are not in the physical reality, so why should they look just like us? But you can see the shape of a humanoid with a rather oddly shaped head and what appears to be a coat or a cape, and then the lower extremities drop away. That's one of the best photographs I have ever seen. So the short of it is that after poking around into shadow people, I discovered that they were connected beyond bedroom invasions to contact experiences of all kinds, to hauntings of all kinds, entity attachments to people and to land, these haunted areas where ongoing activity takes place, the multi-generational attachments. There was even a sexual angle involved of what people would describe as an incubus or succubus attack. Attempted entity kidnapping. Some of these shadow people attempt to drag people away, and when people get into physical tussles with these things, they are often bruised in the process of it. Health problems, including a wasting away kind of effect, a deterioration of health, and that some of them also were associated with harbingers of doom. They seemed to show up when bad things were about to happen, and these were especially the case in multi-generational attachments. I also found evidence for them in folklore. This is from Native American lore from Northern California, these beings called the Watchers, who wear the coats, hats, and stand in remote areas as though they are some kind of sentinels. I believe that we have called them by many other names throughout the ages. The phantom monks and nuns were probably shadow people, dark ghosts, bogeymen, boggarts, goblins, and even the devil. I also discovered a strange connection to the Black Death, the bubonic plague. Now, the bubonic plague that swept through Europe in the Middle Ages killed an estimated 25 million people. And there's a very strange connection between UFOs and shadow people in that regard. And you can find more information on this in William Bramley's The Gods of Eden. This actually is not a shadow person. This was a plague doctor. This was one of the ways they dressed up to try and protect themselves from the noxious gases. Because these mists and fogs were associated with the onset of the plague. And people would even see these mists rising up from the corpses. Now remember, I mentioned that shadow people will often disappear as smoke or vapor or mist, and it does have a dark look to it. Well, there are cases where outbreaks of plagues were associated with UFO activity in the sky prior to the onset of the plague. And here again, it's this connection of kind of like a harbinger of doom, or maybe even the advance warning of something that's going to perhaps be deliberately spread. In these areas, there were these strange, what we would now call shadow people, these mystery men who appeared all in black. Some people called them demons because they were unknown, and strangers, of course. That they would appear, and they seemed to be connected to the onset of plagues. They would knock on doors. They carried swords, brooms, and scythes. They would knock on the doors of homes, and then the people who lived there would fall fatally ill. And these were reported throughout Europe, not everywhere, but in places for a couple of centuries. So were they bringing the plague, or were they warning the people of plague? So I had to ask, what entity would engage in a sustained campaign of monitoring sexual involvement, fear, and even death over the course of human history? Because if shadow people were linked to all these other phenomena, and it always seemed to be malevolently directed towards humans, what's going on? And are we dealing with the same entity, just in different guises? Well, there was only one answer, and that was the Djinn. And once I applied what I call the Djinn template to shadow people, everything fell into place. And in fact, a whole lot of other things started falling into place. Now, I was aware of the Djinn, having studied magic and the history of sorcery and the ancient alien mysteries. I was aware of the Djinn, but I hadn't really factored them too much into my own current work because they just seemed to be in the backdrop of things. But I discovered as I followed these leads that they were not in the backdrop at all. They are very much at the forefront of things and very, very well hidden. I came to the conclusion that shadow people are Djinn, that this is a form that is well suited to these entities and enables them to carry out this stealthy behavior where their true identity is disguised in order to pester, molest, and torment, and that they do have hidden agendas. Now, it seems like I'm going way into a dark side of things here, and yes, there is that element of it, but it is very purposeful to look at this side of things because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, Pierre this morning went into a wonderful examination of the connections between jinn and angels and the ancient gods. And I found this as well. And I also found them playing in different guises now in different ways with human beings. So they have a very long history of dealing with us. So who are they? Well, let's look at some of the other aspects of them. We often, when we think of the jinn, if we think of them all in Western culture, it's usually as some sort of Middle Eastern thing, and they look kind of demonic. Now, they are not any more confined to a region or a culture of this planet than fairies are. You would not say that fairies only belong to Celtic countries. Fairies are everywhere. Ghosts are everywhere. Mysterious creatures are everywhere. And it is true that much of the lore and knowledge about the jinn originated in and developed in the Middle East, but that does not make them a Middle Eastern thing. So Westerners cannot dismiss this entity as something that belongs to a certain group of people. These entities affect all of us. And they come in different guises. Their name means the hidden ones. And in the lore about jinn that go back to the times of ancient Arabia, they are pre-Adamic. They were beings that were here on the earth, supernatural beings. They are said to have very long lifespans. They are definitely supernaturally empowered, and they are quite the superior shapeshifters. They can mimic any form. They can look like human beings. They can look like mysterious creatures or animals, spirits. They will mimic ghosts. They seem to have a propensity and primary interest in molesting and manipulating people, including using us as food sources. Sometimes they have a sexual interest in people, and this also goes way back to ancient times, and they are very well known for being vengeful when wronged. They live in invisible realms. They are invisible to us most of the time, but if we manage to upset them, they will strike out against humans. Well, this is a pattern of activity that applies to some entities that we are very familiar with in our culture as well. So the jinn are not, we're not dealing with gingerbread cookies here, cookie men. They're not all the same. We have a tendency to look for black and white when it comes to these areas. We want to know this is an apple, this is an orange, this is a ghost, this is that. They're all bad, they're all good, but the jinn are not. In a sense, they are like human beings. They are as varied as us in temperament, motive, agendas, behavior. However, it seems that much of our interactions with them, at least the ones that we're most dramatically aware of, fall on the negative side, the manipulative side, but they are deeply embedded in our entire human history. And in the Djinn connection, I talk about re-examining all of our ancient alien god and demigod experiences from the standpoint of Djinn, that beings that we have called the Anunnaki, the Archons, angels, the hybrid gods of Egypt and the Middle East, the Nephilim, the Watchers, they all have connections to the Djinn. And of course, we heard a very good case on that this morning. So the Djinn really hide in plain sight. They are the hidden ones, and yet they are everywhere, and they're below our radar, so we don't always realize that we are dealing with them and not with something else. So let's look at that list again. Here are all the things now. This goes beyond shadow people. If shadow people are Djinn, then the Djinn are involved in all of these things. And that gets us into other areas of entity contact experiences as well. But for us, we only really know about the Djinn through old folk tales that were originally oral stories and comprise a body of tales called the Arabian Nights, or the Book of 1001 Nights. And many stories of these Djinn beings in these tales, which were not translated for a Western audience until the 1700s and widely distributed. The term Djinn became known as genie, and that's how we often think about them. Genie is the singular for Djinn. I use the term Djinn for both singular and plural for the sake of convenience. But the translation of Djinn became genie in some of these translations. Now, Sir Richard Burton, who did one of the most authoritative translations into English of the Arabian Nights, believed it was important to keep the original term, which he did. But for most of the rest of us, they just became genies in the bottle. However, the ancient world knew them very well, and including this historical figure, there's now enough evidence to say that King Solomon, the son of David, second king of Israel, was a historical person. King Solomon, according to ex-canonical texts, had intimate knowledge of the Djinn. Now, he is credited in the Bible with building the Temple of Jerusalem, even the city of Jerusalem, in order to house the Ark of the Covenant. And the Bible talks about the construction of this temple, but doesn't say who built it or exactly how. But the Testament of Solomon, which is an ex-canonical text, talks about how Solomon enslaved the Djinn to do it. Now, when Solomon got the throne, God asked him what he wanted, and instead of riches and power, he wisely answered that he wanted knowledge and wisdom. God was very pleased and gave him the ability to discern and control all spirits. And so he used this power to enslave the Djinn in order to build the temple. And in some translations of this text, they're called demons, but the ancient world really knew them as Djinn. This magical wisdom of King Solomon became the bedrock of our Western mystery and magical tradition. This Solomonic magical lore formed the basis for what became handbooks of magic to use in the summoning of spirits for various purposes. So the Djinn are very much with us in that regard. Now, interestingly, King Solomon, there's a story that one of his concubines was half Djinn. In the ancient world, there was a belief that hybrids could be created between Djinn and human beings. And these hybrids would have the physical characteristics of people, but the powers and presumably the allegiance of Djinn. So here's the Queen of Sheba coming to the court of King Solomon for the first time. The story goes that his advisors were so worried that she was going to control the king that they devised a test to reveal her true identity. Supposedly the Djinn have imperfections. In the lore of Djinn, when they shapeshift to people, they cannot shapeshift perfectly. There's something that gives them away, the shadow people with the misshapen heads. And one of those characteristics was hairy feet or legs. So the stories are that they either put water down on the floor of the temple, or they put like a crystal-like substance that would look like water on the floor, so that as she approached the king, she would have to lift up her skirts and reveal whether or not she had hairy feet and legs. There are also different versions to that story that because she was Djinn, she knew in advance what they were doing, so she shaved her legs, got away with it. But at any rate, she remained a concubine for a while, had a relationship with him, and then supposedly he sent her home with a bevy of Djinn to serve her at the end. But we find stories like that continuing into modern times, where people are reporting sexual congress with beings that they have identified as Djinn, and that there are hybrids somewhere as a result of that are taken into the Djinn world. Well, the Djinn were absorbed into Islam. They predate Islam. The Quran has numerous references to them, even an entire chapter, and the Hadith, which are commentaries and accounts of the Prophet Muhammad, also make numerous references to the Djinn. And according to that creation story, there were in the beginning angels who were created out of a pure spiritual light, and Djinn who were created out of a smokeless fire. And then God decided to create humans out of earth and water, and that's what created a lot of problems. So the angels were instructed to bow down to Adam, but the Djinn did not. And Iblis, who was the leader of the Djinn, who was in heaven with the angels, refused to do so. Now his name means despair, or he who is despaired. And he said that he would not bow before humans because he considered them to be inferior. And why would he do so? Now there's a lot of ambiguity between angels and Djinn, and a lot of debate as to whether or not the Djinn were angels. And there's incredible blurring between those lines. The Djinn are supposedly not angels, but yet they're in heaven along with the angels. And there are never any clear-cut demarcations. But at any rate, Iblis refuses to do that. And so this angers God, and he casts the Djinn out. They appeal, and he gives them until Judgment Day to make their case that human beings really are inferior. And so the cast-out Djinn then become like the fallen angels. They retreat to another world, which in modern terms could be called a parallel dimension attached to Earth, where many of them seem to remain committed to tormenting human beings. But it's a much bigger picture than that, because the Djinn seem to be in pursuit of their own agendas. They have some of their own self-centered purposes as well, but they also might be playing a greater role than we could suspect. So this division of the interdimensional boundaries, I believe in an interdimensional Earth, that we have a planet that we share with many kinds of beings, and most of the time we don't see them because they vibrate at a different level than we do, and yet there are these doorways and experiences that pop open and we have encounters with them. And so it becomes like a very thin doorway where there are pushes and pulls on either side for access. And sometimes we want them to come in, we do a summoning, and then with the Djinn, it's a case of pressing against our own barriers to have access to us. So what is it that they really want? What's really going on here? And how are we involved with them in the greater scheme of things? That's a question that I think we can find some answers for in the abduction arena. But we have not had a clue as to how to approach that yet, because it goes back to how the Djinn are involved in Western culture. We don't know them other than these genies in the bottles and lamps. They never really entered our mythology or our folklore or our daily experience. Much of the rest of the world is quite familiar with the Djinn, and yet many people have never even heard the term or dismiss it as something that really doesn't pertain to them. They have been portrayed in our fiction, our film, our television as silly, funny, quirky, not to be taken seriously. It never really goes much beyond this. With the genies, we have depictions from films. Again, you know, the exotic creature that is more fantasy and imaginary than actually real. It only appears out of bottles in order to grant wishes. Materializes, this is from The Thief of Baghdad from the 1940s, materializes as smoke, and then is obliged to grant wishes to human beings as thanks for that. The wishes never go very well, by the way. First one goes well, second one does not. Third one is usually wish to undo the other wishes. So we have this idea of the Djinn as something purely fantasy instead of incorporating it into our entity lexicon, like we have even with the fairies. Very good special effects for the 1940s. But, you know, if it wasn't, the Djinn belonged to the realm of flying carpets, and that was it. That's been it with us. Well, it's really a different story, because meanwhile, they are out there engaging with us on varieties of fronts. Well, if the Djinn were made out of smokeless fire, well, what is their true form? If we always see them in some sort of horrific way, some sort of monstrous way, and they're shapeshifters, what are they? Nobody really knows, and the Djinn really aren't telling us either. They are the masters of many forms. I have identified them in cases of ghosts and spirits. They have that blurring with the angels. human beings, very strange looking human beings. They can show up just literally as pillars of smoke and fog. And they often have this connection with this electrical field of energy through blue lights, glows, and even a palpable electrical field. Well, in old lore, their most favored form was that of the snake or the reptile. And we find many references to that in the ancient literature. In modern terms, they also show up quite a bit as phantom black dogs, the spectral black dogs. Now, these are all kinds of mysterious creatures that often show up in conjunction with waves of sightings and UFO activity. None of these things are isolated. They are all interrelated. So the spectral hound is another form of theirs. Most often they like to take forms that disturb human beings, things that should not be, combinations of characteristics that jolt people and even terrify us. We could even make a case for some of the famous mysterious creatures we have encountered in recent times, Mothman being one of them, a winged humanoid, always shown with head, but actually Mothman had no head, just two what appeared to be red laser-like lights set in the shoulder blades. All weird forms that the Djinn would be very fond of taking. Here's a drawing from northern Pennsylvania a couple of years ago. It's difficult to say, and the experiencer did not know whether this thing on the back was a set of folded wings or some sort of weird-looking cape. This entity has been seen quite a bit in a certain active haunted corridor in Pennsylvania. They might even account for dogmen, entities that are combinations of humans and wolves or dogs. Here's an entity from the Appalachians called the grave robber, another combination of creatures, a pig, an armadillo, and an alligator-like snout. They're called grave robbers because they like to hang out in cemeteries and dig up graves. And when I'm talking about these entities, I'm not talking about sightings from 100 years ago. I'm talking about everyday people who run into these creatures all the time, and they are part of our mysterious other dimensional world that we live in. This is from a case that I had in Florida, an experiencer who was, she had all kinds of Djinn experiences, abductions, sentient orbs in her house, and she was plagued by this entity for a while. She also was certain that it was Djinn, who would show up as a young man in just very bizarre looking attire with these kind of boots that were undone, tattered clothing, fingernails that were more like claws, and a sawtooth grin. And even though the figure it doesn't look that threatening in the drawing, whenever this entity would show up, she would be absolutely terrified. We can see the Djinn in the latest iteration of shadow people, the black-eyed kids and adults. These are human-like entities with solid black eyes and saw teeth that, just like the vampire of old, want to come into your house. Will knock on your door and come into your house, and if they manage to get across the threshold or to touch you in any way, you become ill, you have bad luck, bad fortune, all kinds of horrible things happen to you. These have been reported since the 1980s. They probably go back earlier than that, but those are some of the earliest cases we've been able to document. I think it's just the latest wrinkle in a very old phenomenon. And we can certainly see this weird shape-shifting in the moon-eyed people. This is from Native American lore in the Appalachians. Supposedly a weird race of beings that lived in remote areas in the mountains that preceded people. This interesting example came from a Djinn experiencer who described the being as a mass of moving lines of energy that would coalesce sometimes into skull-like forms and human-like forms. And the description was, I saw a metallic shape right in front of me. It was shaped a lot like bismuth, bluish green, angular, and opalescent. It starts to bend and twist almost organically of its own accord, and a deafening, resonating hum begins to fill my ears. In many cases of shadow people and also ET abductions, we find the experiencer has an electrical field around them in the air. Their skin tingles, the hair rises up on their arms and neck. They hear buzzing, humming, and ringing in their ears. I think my own interpretation of this is that these are phenomena of transdimensional shifting going on. Well, the Djinn can also appear in very exotic, alluring forms, especially when they want to seduce people. But behind their allure, there was always this dark form. And there are many cases on record where the Djinn will start out in a very attractive way, and then they show some of their true self, whether or not it's their true self, but it's almost always ugly. And it's used sometimes in a way to keep people in line. These are cases where the Djinn have formed almost companion-like attachments to people, and if the humans displease them, then they show up in a horrific guise. I found a very significant connection between Djinn and fairies, to the point where you could say that fairies are Djinn. They have almost identical origin stories about being here before humans, that they were pushed out of their place because of humans. They have similar supernatural powers. And even though we think of fairies as friendly little wing things a lot today, our ancestors had an entirely different view of them. Many of our ancestors from Celtic countries, including right here in the UK, viewed fairies as dangerous beings. You did not want to cross them. They had their own territory. The fairies didn't like people, and so you'd best steer clear of them. And the same beliefs apply to the Djinn as well. The fairies will haunt, the Djinn will haunt. Both of them are interested in abduction. They both will possess people. And there is a history of sexual engagement with fairies for the creation of hybrids as well. So we find very interesting crossovers among all these areas, indicating that we're probably just dealing with different forms of the same kinds of entities. Here's some other similarities between Djinn and fairies. And that when you run afoul of them, you start to suffer. Your health suffers, you have bad luck. They have this tricky nature, you can't really trust them. They have their own agenda going, and yet they share the planet with us. I was very struck with some of the similarities between the evil character in Leprechaun and the Djinn movie Wishmaster. Both of these came out in the 1980s, and they act in almost identical ways in terms of hostility and manipulation toward human beings. Now, Wishmaster is, in my opinion, the only Western film to be made to date that really portrays an interesting picture of the Djinn. You know, they're not genies in the bottle, they're not silly little things, they are dangerous beings who manage to come through interdimensional portals and have agendas against people. Very good movie. It was Wishmaster 2 and 3, not good. Wishmaster 1, very good. Well, the ET fairy connection has been explored at length, so here we have more cross connections. We've had a thorough examination of the similarities between many cases of ET contact experiences and the similarities to fairy lore, and even descriptions of beings that are called ETs but look like they could come out of a fairy book. This is from the mid-1950s case in Kentucky, where a silver disc came out of the sky, landed near a farmhouse, and these goblin-like entities came out and cavorted about in circus-like fashion all night, thumping around on the roof, peering in windows, doing somersaults, terrifying the residents. Bullets went straight through them. They make an escape and bring the sheriff back, but the entities pull a disappearing act. They're gone when the sheriff arrives, and then they leave just as suddenly as they came with no explanation. Very similar to accounts of fairy engagement, and yet we've called them ETs. And so we have now the cross connections between the ETs, the fairies, the Djinn and the fairies, and so we can only assume that the ET forms are not beyond the interest and ability of the Djinn, and indeed they are involved in ET abductions. Well, I found in examining the shadow people literature, just looking for patterns, that a high number of people volunteered that they were also ET abductees. I thought that was quite interesting, that there would be so many reporting both kinds of experiences, far more than I would expect just at random. So I went back through my database and sent out new queries, and I now include ET information in my questionnaires as well, and found even more accounts of, yes, I've had both, even starting from early in childhood. So if the Djinn are involved in ET abductions, well, are they just shape-shifting into these aliens? Do the shadow people have a role in that? Because if people are experiencing shadow people and ETs, what's the connection there in this hidden form? And there is a specific role that shadow people, Djinn in their shadow person form, seem to have in the ET connection. They don't seem to appear during the abduction as much as before and after. This is a phenomenon that seems to have escaped notice in the abduction literature. Nobody really paid much attention to it. Well, I interviewed abductees and investigators as well. Stan Romanek is famous for his shadow people experiences. Here's a photograph that he says he captured on one of his surveillance cameras of a shadow figure poised outside of his bedroom door. But he said that he also sees them during the day and throughout the house. He described them as having kind of an electrical, almost mechanical nature to them, but they are part of the abduction phenomenon. Well, I thought if these shadow figures, if Djinn is shadow people, are involved in abductions, then we will find evidence for it in the literature. And this is just a very small sample. I went back through the abduction literature. These are just a handful of books, some of the better known books. But I went back through rereading the accounts and finding the presence of shadow people everywhere. And yet they never seem to be taken into any sort of significant account in terms of the relationship to the abduction. I tried talking to abduction researchers with mixed success. People either were familiar with shadow people but didn't want to deal with it. It was just unimportant. It was just another one of those things that happened to the victims. Or they were not aware of it at all. And so it was a real mixed bag. More connections. An obvious one, men in black. You've got these humanoid figures dressed in what appears to be dark clothing and hats. They are very good candidates for accounts of men in black, who seem to be authoritative individuals who show up and harass experiencers and threaten them not to disclose what they have experienced or seen. These figures act and move very strangely. Some of them have a mechanical way of acting. There is always something weird about them, just like the shape-shifted Djinn who can't quite get the human form right. Their hair is weird, their clothing is rumpled, something's out of kilter. They speak in mechanical ways, but yet they can communicate telepathically. They always seem to know where someone is. They come with a syndrome of phenomena like poltergeist phenomena, telephone disturbances, nightmares. Dream invasion is very common from negative entities. And they can make life a living hell for experiencers. Gray Barker wrote about Alfred Bender, a man back in the 50s, who he had a newsletter and a reporting bureau, and he said that he was going to reveal the secret of UFOs. Well, 3 men in black visited him and evidently made a case that he should not do this, and Bender began to suffer all kinds of breakdown symptoms. His health deteriorated. He had these poltergeist phenomena outbreaks, felt he was being followed and watched, and within short order had closed his bureau, never published any secrets. Other people, during the Mothman wave in the mid-1960s in the Ohio River Valley in America, men in black were quite prevalent, visiting people who had seen Mothman or had seen mysterious lights or craft in the sky. In fact, the UFO ET activity really was what was going on in that wave. Mothman was only a minor player in what was a huge outbreak of UFO activity. Men in black were part of that. So just another iteration, in my opinion, of the shadow person / Djinn. Now there is a vampiric aspect to this. I've mentioned that people suffer this wasting away. Well, in Djinn lore, they take the life force and they take it through blood and fear. And of course, we've had the long history of blood sacrifice to gods and to higher entities. It is still well known in Djinn lore today that this is what the Djinn really want from us. They want the energy from spilled blood. And so when people have unfortunate accidents or there's war and carnage, the energy that is released from the shedding of blood is something that the Djinn can make use of. And they seem to do it through fear as well. That when they come and terrify people at night and do nothing but stand by the bed or be in the doorway, and people are terrified, they're still giving off incredible adrenaline and adrenaline emotional energy of fear that these entities, I believe, can make use of, and that seems to be a purpose of it. When this energy is vampirized from human beings, then people suffer. Their lives begin to fall apart. If they are regular victims, they suffer psychologically, a deterioration. Their life degrades, their relationships degrade. And we see some of the same effects in the ET abduction community as well. So aliens also, they take the life force through genetic material, the abducting beings. And then we have an interesting connection there through the Chupa Chupa lights, which were reported. Jacques Vallée reported on them. Bob Pratt did too. These craft who appeared in various places in South America. And these red laser-like lights and beams would emanate from these craft and strike people, and people would have wounds on them. People died, their health deteriorated. Supposedly they experienced an unknown loss of blood, like some of the exsanguinated, mutilated animals that are associated with the ET activity as well. So there's a vampiric aspect to the negative side of these encounters as well, across the board, connecting the two of them. Okay, the search for meaning. What sense do we make out of all of this? Well, just taking a few examples from some of the experts across the board, trying to put a good spin on it, seeing it as something very horrific for people. John Mack wrote about this in Abduction, and he did not believe that it was anything imaginary or any sort of mass hysteria. It was a genuine phenomenon, but he saw it as positive for humanity as a whole. And many of the people that he interviewed, and some of the ones that he profiled in his book Abductions, saw it as well, that despite the horrific things that were happening to them, they were players in something very good that was happening. Many abductees would be hard-pressed to agree with that when their lives have fallen apart on them. So Max said, I would not say that the aliens never resort to deception to hide their purposes, but that it is, in my view, too narrow or linear interpretation. We may be witnessing something far more complex, namely an awkward joining of two species engineered by an intelligence we are unable to fathom for a purpose that serves both our goals with difficulties for each. And for many, that might seem to be too simplistic, kind of a Cinderella, rosy eyeglass look at it. But yet there is I believe, some truth in this. And unfortunately, Mac is no longer with us to explore the developing angles in the abduction research. I would like to know what he would have to say today. And he went on to say, we have only sketchy knowledge of what the hybrid program, which seems to lie at the center of abduction phenomenon, is really about. Yet my overall impression is that the abduction process is not evil and that the intelligences at work do not wish us ill. Well, I do disagree with that. I think that we do have some ill wishers in the mix there. Again, we can't look at an explanation that is all black or white. We can't try and pigeonhole it into something that is all good or all bad. There's a huge gray area in between where I think a lot of agendas and motives are colliding. Jacobs saw it as, or has seen it rather, as something that is quite negative. It's a breeding program to create hybrids that have an extended ability to stay on Earth, and that these are infiltrating the planet. Well, you could certainly see that in some of the Djinn motives, that if the Djinn wish to come back into this reality in a greater way, and they are incapable of staying in this reality, manifesting in form for very long, then a hybrid would certainly offer a lot of advantages to them. It does go much, much beyond that. Well, Vallée has examined this from a variety of perspectives as well, and in some of his works he sees the more positive angles to the abduction phenomenon, and by the time we get to confrontations, he's seeing a lot of hostility involved, that this is not imaginary or extraterrestrial. This is an advanced technology with hostile potential. I do believe that there is an extraterrestrial component to it, but that largely we are dealing with interdimensional beings, beings that really are associated with us right here on the planet. John Keel, who wrote about the Mothman wave and a lot of other phenomena, had the view that this is all trickster. This is always hostile to people. It's like a big circus playground of stuff going on that we have no control over whatsoever. And that every time we try and get close to an answer, the phenomenon with a capital P just shapeshifts on us, and we're left with more questions than answers. So where do we find some traction here that we can start to make sense out of all of this? Well, I see three possible scenarios, and one is, okay, there's a takeover. The Djinn, they do want hybrids, and they want to be able to resume their place on the planet that was said that they had before we came along. They just shapeshift to maneuver around us and cater to our beliefs, what we're willing to accept, what we're willing to tolerate, and that the ones that are dealing with us really just want us out of the way. Many people do favor this scenario. Scenario B, manipulation. Not quite so dire. They're entertaining us at their own expense. They want to seduce and possess us in order to have physical experiences, and they're just involved in big chess games, and that they do have a role in politics, war, and conflict. Now, a couple of years ago, I was asked to do a paper for a book on the role of the Djinn in the Arab Spring, and were the Djinn behind some of the, not some, but were behind a global conflict. And it's an undercurrent that you don't see publicized very often, but the undercurrent is there, the assumption that yes, of course the Djinn are involved. Politicians sell out to them, they make deals with them for power, and that they're really like the arms merchant. They really don't care who wins in a conflict as long as there's conflict, because that's what benefits them, the complete upheaval and disarray of humanity, and the feeding off of that. And you could certainly see that formula play out in history. If you want to apply that to other historical situations, you could certainly see that as well. So that's one particular scenario. The Black Death would be an example of that. Then there's another scenario. They really are strange allies that despite all of this negative emphasis, these horrific experiences, maybe they have a really different role that we haven't considered, and that is to force us to face fear and to come to terms with the interdimensional Earth and with our multidimensional selves. They might even be monitoring or moderating the roles of other entities. We have no indication for whether they're cooperating with other entities in the abduction scenario or they're competing with them. What role do they have? Maybe it's a moderating kind of effect, and maybe they are really instigators of transformational change. Now, what we find in the abduction literature over and over again, the people who have had the really long, serial, horrific experiences where their entire lives have been torn apart, there was always this search for the high note, like what sense do I make out of this that I can come out of it for the better. This can't just be about my destruction and the destruction of other people. So we have to consider this angle, and it actually has merit to it. Now, I don't think that it's a case of any one of these scenarios. There's probably a mix of things going on, because as I've emphasized, the Djinn have a variety of motives, just like human beings do. You wouldn't describe all human beings as terrorists, but yet there are terrorists among us. You wouldn't describe us all as bullies, but yet there are bullies among us. And even among the Djinn, in Djinn lore, there are enlightened Djinn, Djinn who feel very neutral to us. Some of the ones who have communicated have said, well, they don't feel ill toward us, but we're a lower life form, so they don't want to be involved with us. But we're getting a skewed end of the spectrum with the ones that are acting out in a hostile way. But maybe it has some sort of higher purpose in a bigger scheme of things. So we have to consider this possibility if we're going to make any sense out of what is going on. We have to stop looking for black and white answers, and we have to stop looking for external villains in this case. So there's an alchemy to this about entity contact. And now alchemy is the process of transmutation from the impure to the pure. And you may be aware of stories from earlier centuries where alchemists attempted to change base metal into gold, that there was some magical formula that would take the impure from the earth and turn it into the pure. And from a spiritual perspective, there is the path of spiritual alchemy that we are all on in life, that life is about purifying ourselves and attaining something higher, more expanded consciousness, a greater awareness of who we are and where we fit into the scheme of things. So that is the gold of enlightenment. Now, the only way you get to the gold is by going through the darkness, and that is the first stage of alchemy, which is like a cycle, that there is a complete destruction into blackness through chaos and things coming apart before the process can begin to recombine things and to reformulate into the gold of enlightenment. This is a formula called the Philosopher's Stone, which this is from alchemical art. This is called the Emerald Tablet, which was supposedly a stone that contained the magical formula for this transformation process. And I had a lucid dream one night that reminded me of the Emerald Tablet, in which a being, and it's a God the Father kind of figure because of the triangular halo around it, came and showed me a symbol for truth. Now I'm a tarot reader, so this was couched in tarot symbolism. You know, everything's within context to personal life. And this was like an additional card to the tarot deck, and it was called Truth. And it's a pyramid of actually 7 layers with a flame coming out on top, and bears some similarities to this triangular-like emerald tablet, the formula for perfection with the flame, the solar flame coming out on top. And that I was shown this as that this was a symbol for truth. Well, symbols have a way of acting on our consciousness. They're like shorthand. They contain much more information than you could ever describe in writing. They activate consciousness in a certain way. And so I felt I was being given this symbol as something that really pertained to my work and to a lot of the things that were going on. That this was an alchemical process, the search for truth, the soul search for truth, and that it has many layers, and that sometimes we need to look between the layers to find the answers. So what do abductions really reveal? Well, maybe they reveal that we have a need to heal a tremendous split in the collective human psyche, and that this is really a coming to terms of our own wholeness on various levels. And how do we do that best? Well, it might be through going through the dark side. As anyone who has gone through trials in life will attest, that's sometimes when you make the most growth and the most advancement. So what may be happening now in this particular outplay of engagement with these beings is that we are collectively confronting dark side fear and questions that we have to grapple with in order to expand our consciousness beyond the physical realm. We have to come to terms with fear and also with the fact that we share this planet and this cosmos with other beings, and that key to transformation is really consciousness. So nuts and bolts, looking for external factors, those are all part of the picture, but they're not the whole picture. We're not going to find the answer just in hard evidence of landed craft, bodies of aliens, conspiracies and things like that. We are going to find some answers, but we're not going to find them all. And the key to it really is, how do we transform our consciousness in the face of all of these experiences? So the way out really is the way in. And I think that's one of the most significant things of these experiences that seem on the surface to be so troubling, so horrific, and have such a long stretch of playing out over human history, that is the light, the top side of them. We have to shift our perspective if we are ever going to get a handle on it, if we are ever going to get answers to some of these troubling questions about our engagements with other entities.